Right now, previous quarterly statistics released by Cele, that was in June, revealed that violent crimes were on the rise between January and March this year. So with the previous crime statistics revealing a violent start to the year 2022, do the figures released today inspire any confidence in our law enforcement agencies? Well, to answer this question, I am joined by independent crime and policing expert, Dr. Johan. Thank you very much, Doc, for your time here on eNCA. Let's first talk about the fact that we've seen an increase now of about 500 more or 446 more crimes taking place in South Africa compared to the same period last year. But the fact that this is 6,400 murders rather, and 2,766 of those murders happened using a gun. You know, what does this mean in terms of the violence in South Africa and the gun laws in our country?
Yeah, it's you know, this whole picture is a one of mixed messages. The serious and violent crimes certainly are keeping its increasing trend, and that's the worrying thing. We've been increasing our murder rate since 2011, 2012. There was a brief respite in 2020 due to the restrictions, the COVID restrictions. But as these restrictions were lifted, especially since 2021, we saw a return to that increasing trend in these serious and violent crimes. So it's a mixed picture because the increases that we see still in murder, just over 11%, is half the level that we saw in the previous quarter. And similarly, we've seen decreases in sexual offences as well as in assault crimes. So that's why it's a mixed picture. As far as the police performance is concerned, of course, it's worrying that, you know, we've been calling, most of us involved in this field have been calling for an urgent reform of the police service. There is a lot that police can do much better than they are doing at the moment. And that, of course, is another debate. And we saw where the police intensified their presence and their policing operations during the strict lockdown in 2020. There was a clampdown on crime, and there were those reductions. So clearly the police need to improve much more than they are doing at the moment, and they can only do this with a kind of reform that was already called for in the National Development Plan.
Yeah.
But there is another strategy now in place that calls for an integrated strategy, and that strategy was approved earlier this year, and we haven't seen any firm signs of the implementation of the strategy yet.
Yeah. And, you know, coming back to the firearms part, I mean, 6,400 murders taking place in South Africa in just 3 months, right? But 2,766 of those happening behind the barrel of the gun. So, you know, it says to us possibly that maybe it's just too easy for people to access guns in South Africa, sometimes even from police themselves, etc. And also, you know, looking at the mass shootings that we've seen at taverns during the past few months and finding out that an AK-47, which is not legal in our country, was used. This is also a cause for concern.
Yes, absolutely right. I think one of the primary concerns at this stage is the availability of firearms, and especially illegal firearms, or then firearms in the hands of criminals. And you know, the extent to which the Firearm Control Act is able to sort of impact on this appears to be limited. Certainly, there's been improvements in terms of clamping down on the illegal possession of firearms using the Firearm Control Act. But there needs to be much more. There needs to be a cleaning up and again returning to the police service in terms of police reform. It's far too easy to get a firearm from the police. The police announces from time to time in Parliament the number of firearms they lose due to negligence and to criminal activity and all sorts of other crimes. For example, burglaries and theft of police firearms. But there are also evidence that came out in research where police members rent out their firearms for criminal activities, and those firearms are then returned to the police. So there's a lot the police must do to prevent the losses for whatever reasons from their firearm stores. And the same goes for the military and also applies to private security companies. But then there are other sources of firearms coming from across our border. So there's a need for the police to both clean up their act, the military, private security companies, and to enforce the Firearms Control Act much more as far as these institutions are concerned.
Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
the police need to carry out many, many more operations in terms of searches for illegal firearms and seizures of those firearms.
Absolutely. I mean, you remind me of a story that our former colleague Barry Bateman once did about the Northwood police station, where a cache basically went missing, and you know, a lot happened there with the criminals eventually getting the guns. But talking about the fact that we heard the minister saying that the number of rape and drunk driving perpetrators arrested increased during this particular period, April to June of this year, you know, and we mention police a lot when it comes to our crime in South Africa, of course, because they are our first point when it comes to, you know, fighting crime. But, you know, arresting people and convictions doesn't translate to the same. So it doesn't necessarily mean that South Africans should feel safe just because perpetrators were just arrested.
Yes, that's also a concern. If you look at murder, you know, the conviction rate for murder halved over the last decade, which tells you there's a problem with the police in terms of successful detection and prosecution of these criminals. As far as sexual offences are concerned, you know, the same principle applies, and it could be that the figure that the police have now presented could be due to various reasons. You know, the level of trust in the police service have dropped. We know it dropped, and there are 2 studies that shows the level of trust in the police, confidence in the police dropped from just under 50% to about 25% over the last decade. So fewer people tend, especially sexual offences, tend to report these crimes to the police. But then on the other hand, you see these huge increases in other crimes against women and children, which the minister and the police presented today.
Yeah.
So this points not just to the levels of incompetence within the police service, but it also shows us that social issues remains a concern, and most of those are outside of the reach of the police. So this is why we need to return to the integrated strategy where other government departments, institutions, and community-based organizations needs to become more involved in dealing with
and
the
given more
social
power.
issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you when it comes to that. Thank you very much for speaking to us, Doc. That was independent crime and policing expert, Dr. Johan Berger.